Vamos a hablar de la situación actual y los desafíos de las energías renovables en nuestra región. Ya ustedes lo conocieron en el acto inaugural de este Congreso. Es jefe de la unidad de energía del CARICOM desde el año 2014. Desde su unidad promueve la producción de energía sostenible y limpia, pero con entrega eficiente que ayude a garantizar la inversión, que es un punto muy importante y al que prestan mucha atención los inversionistas. Con nosotros el doctor Devon Gardner, gerente del Programa de Energía del CARICOM.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, after the wonderful and very deeply insightful presentation of my colleague and friend Andre, there is, of course, not a lot that I can add, save and except that in the context of the Caribbean, I will seek to dig into some of the issues that was previously raised by Andres, and also to point to some of what we are doing in the context of CARICOM, which is a Caribbean community, in addressing some of these issues headway. In fact, some of them are issues that we are addressing collectively with the Dominican Republic within the context of the TAPSEC, which is a joint program between us. I want to set a disclaimer, so to speak, in the sense that the Vice Minister will be speaking after me on the Dominican Republic context. And so my focus will be on the Caribbean community, which does not include the Dominican Republic. So even though we speak about the Caribbean in this case, my focus will be on those countries that are in yellow, which is the Bahamas, Antigua, Barbuda, and all of these countries in the Eastern Caribbean, Haiti, Jamaica, Belize, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and so on. So the countries of the Caribbean community, which is the countries that are bound by treaty, the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas of 2001, under which energy is one of the areas of functional cooperation that we pursue. I'll start by giving an overview of the situation, in general terms. The situation in general terms is one in which all the countries are heavily dependent on fossil sources for transport and electricity for their energy services. One of those countries historically, which is Trinidad and Tobago, is a net fossil generator, so they have a history of oil and gas exports. And as a result of that, they are the only country to a large extent that have been able to satisfy their domestic demand with indigenous conventional resources. In the context of Suriname, Suriname also has a significant amount of oil production domestically, and so Suriname has been able to satisfy the majority of its domestic demand for energy from local oil supplies. The majority of countries, however, they do not produce oil or gas, but they have energy systems that are largely built around oil and other fossil products, mostly diesel, heavy fuel oil are used for generation, diesel and gasoline for transport. So in a nutshell, what this is showing is that the vast majority of countries are dependent on imported oil. And this morning the minister spoke about the volatility of oil prices on the global market. It doesn't take a lot. You see what is happening even now. If there is growing tension with the US and Iran, as is the case, you will see the markets react. if there are conflicts with Yemen and the Saudi Arabia within that region that seem to be escalating. The conflicts are there, but if they seem to be escalating, then you see the markets respond, and you see the volatility of the oil markets continue even now. While all of this is the case in respect to the dependence on imported fossils, which are not cheap, you're talking about anywhere from $65 to $70 a barrel nowadays for oil. You're talking about still volatile, still very volatile commodity. There are opportunities for renewable energy within the countries. If one looks through the mix of options within the countries, where you see ranging from high to relatively low, and low in the context of the Caribbean sometimes doesn't mean insufficient, because in many instances where you are operating small grids that require small amounts of electricity, even a low resource potential can be sometimes enough. Point is that all the countries have good solar resources, and yes, Guyana and Suriname do have good solar resources too, but there are typically better options than utility scale solar in countries that are heavily linked to the rainforests of the Amazon, and for which you probably get 60 to 70 days of clear skies per year. There is geothermal in the Eastern Caribbean countries, and it's one of the things that will be spoken about later in one of the sessions with the CDB and the IDB. And there is a significant amount of hydro, and wind. Wind, of course, is always a challenge because of the fact that wind is very site-specific, and in countries where land is a premium, site specificity can be one of the hindrances towards wind development. And of course, there are the technical challenges regarding integration, but one of the biggest challenges is more in relation to sites and the availability of the land. Hydro is, in fact, the poster child of the Caribbean, and I will show you shortly that hydro actually dominates the renewable landscape, even within CARICOM countries. Since 2013, CARICOM countries have been pursuing a common energy policy and a common regional strategy on energy, given some of the factors that we know in respect to the global oil situation and the heavy dependence of the countries on imported oil. And given the fact that the countries recognized there were significant amounts of renewable energy resources, and they wanted to figure out how they could collectively improve their development and use of renewable energy options. So within the context of the CARICOM energy policy that is being pursued since 2013, countries are, encouraged to look at where there are opportunities to participate collectively and in a cooperative approach that provides benefits to all. So in a situation of high tide raising all boats is one that is promoted. But at the same time, while recognizing and emphasizing regional treatment of those actions that will give a comparative advantage, the policy also recognizes that in some instances, countries may have to take individual actions because of differences that they may have in some instances. And so it is that while within the context of the CARICOM energy policy, we have articulated also in 2013, since 2013, how it is that that pathway of the Caribbean Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy, what we affectionately call CSERMS, can lead us to regional targets for renewable power generation, energy efficiency, and of course the attendant CO2 emissions reductions that comes with that. And all of that could give us national and regional actionable items that we can implement. So we have been going through to do a systematic amount of work trying to understand the energy systems, both from the production and consumption side, understanding the sectors at the electricity and transport levels, looking at the potential for energy efficiency and renewable energy use, looking at the grid and other energy infrastructure, including that for fuel distribution and markets, and then looking at the policy pieces that are necessary to make all of this work, including the finance and capacity issues associated with policy. Where we are is one where we can say that having started in 2012 on work on the Caribbean Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy, at a time where we were collectively as CARICOM at about 5% renewable energy penetration. In 2018, when we took stock, and compared to Dominican Republic, I know this is small, collectively, we are 5.5 gigawatts, and we are at an average growth rate at around 3.6%. The renewable energy penetration within CARICOM countries collectively is around 10%. And this is way below what we wanted to achieve, because we had set goals of 20% by 2017 on the one hand, and we also recognize that there is a lot more scope for us to do more. This gives you a snapshot of where countries are relative to their own individual targets. And this is not necessarily relative to the targets that were recommended, in fact, under the CSRMs. These were more based on the countries articulating and setting their own targets. And we see that countries have been at different levels of ambition in respect to where they have set their targets. And we have seen those which have been ambitious and have been close, like Suriname. Those which have been ambitious and not too close, but still very high in terms of progress. And some which have not been not too ambitious, but still not showing much in terms of progress here. Trinidad and Tobago, obviously, understandably, hasn't had very high appetite for renewables given the large domestic fossil resources. If we look at this in a much more, in terms of capacity that is installed in the countries, then it's easier to see what we have. And we see that Belize, Dominica, and Suriname dominates the landscape in terms of the percentage or the proportion of installed renewable. And the reason for that is simple. If you would recall, hydro is Belize, Dominica, and Suriname. Hydro is the reason why those countries have made such significant progress. Guyana, in fact, is one of the few countries with a significant hydro resource that have not been able to use hydro in that regard. In the case of Suriname, as an example, 90% of its renewable energy is due to, 95% of its renewable energy portfolio is from hydro, which is from the Brokoponde Dam. And in the case of Belize, significant portions, over 70% of this renewable energy is from its hydro resources. In fact, within CARICOM collectively, there is around 600 megawatts of renewable energy portfolio out of the 5.5 gigawatts. And of this, 70% of this is from the hydro projects that are in Belize, Suriname, St. Vincent, Dominica, and Jamaica. So there's around over 2/3 of the renewable energy is from hydro. And this is one of the areas of concern, because we believe that there are significant opportunities for solar and wind and other types of renewable energy options, including geothermal in the Eastern Caribbean, that have not been realized. We recognize too that there is an underrepresentation of how much of those opportunities are probably present. Nevertheless, we recognize that there's a significant amount that's happening behind the scenes or below the surface. In terms of policy, there's a lot that has been done. In terms of targets, all the countries have targets except Suriname. In terms of strategies such as net metering or net billing, significant work has also been done. All the countries have been disintegrating the electricity sector and have been looking at disaggregation from the monopolistic vertical integrated utilities into much more, if you want to call it, a disaggregated arrangement that includes IPPs, especially given that IPPs are expected to play a significant role in renewable energy development, given that many of the utilities do not have the experience of developing renewable energy. We have been working on interconnection policies and standards and so on. So there are issues with respect to whether these policies translate into laws, and of course, the kind of regulations to really attract the projects that we want. But we recognize that there's a lot of work that needed to be done to bring the capacity requirements online, especially to attract the kind of financing. And there will be a session on financing later. So in a sense, to bring the challenges home, what we find is that the issue of what has been set at regional level and bringing that to national level has been not necessarily suitably connected. The question of whether we should go renewables in some countries still remain. It's still an open discussion, especially when you have countries, for instance, which have significant numbers of options. Let's look at Dominica as an example. 24 megawatts total, 17 megawatts peak, 4 different options on the table: hydro, wind, geothermal, solar. How do you integrate all the resources that exist into such a small grid? And put into that the complication that half of the demand centers are not necessarily located on the side of the island where the resources are most common. And the mountain in between is a volcanic mountain that is very steep and rugged. These are some of the challenges that countries do face. Come on top, look at issues too related to the levelized cost of electricity. I know we disaggregate the levelized cost of electricity. A reality is that a diesel generator is much easier to put down in terms of upfront capital financing. And in small countries with small economies that are not necessarily in the best financial shape, compared to the capital costs associated with some of the other much more attractive LCOE options, but nevertheless, one which requires less financing up front. A lot of times diesel win, especially in cases where countries are looking for immediate firm capacity. I have a situation in Guyana right now where the GPL, which is the light and power company, requires immediate firm capacity because of some issues with their reserve margins, and they want to get the most easily financeable solution, and they are going to put in some diesel just so that they can be able to meet their reserve margins. Then the question of integrating variable renewables is also another one that continues to affect the Caribbean, and we will speak about that significantly tomorrow, so I won't go into too much details. But we have not yet started to figure out, or to include, we haven't started yet to include the integration of variable renewables, such as wind and solar, and the flexibility that they bring to the table into the planning scenario in the region, and that's a challenge. In fact, in some of the smaller utilities, because of the lack of experience in managing the variabilities, sometimes you do not see the fuel savings emerging from the integration of wind or solar, because the spinning reserve generators continue to run, because they are not comfortable and confident enough to shut off some of the spinning reserve generators. And so the issue of how to save fuel from managing the grid generation and dispatch properly is one that continues, and it's something that we have to work on. What we are trying to do, and our colleague from CIMH will speak tomorrow, is to try to understand and to model some of the variability so that we can predict them up front. So if we can predict the variability in PV production and say when the PV is going to drop before it happens, this will help to give more confidence to the generators, and this is part of the work that we are doing. Then, of course, there's the unanswered question of what role does energy efficiency plays. If we are talking about renewable energy, some people will say we should do energy efficiency first and then do renewables after. It's not one or the other, it's both. And how far and how fast do we pursue energy efficiency action is one that continues to stymie how much renewables we do integrate into our systems. In the CARICOM context, we are in the process of understanding that through our regional energy efficiency strategy, and you will have access to the slides so you can see the details later. Then, of course, the big question of the electric utilities. What is the role of the electric utilities, especially as there is greater convergence around those who are producing and those who are using power, what we call the prosumers. We have a lot more on the distributed side in terms of energy being produced and available for the grid perhaps. And we have, of course, situations where, as I mentioned before, the utilities are no longer the best placed to develop certain types of projects. You're talking about a geothermal project, you're talking about hydro projects. Some of these utilities neither have the experience nor the financial sheet to do some of these projects, and therefore as utilities continue to lose a lot on the generation side to bring in IPPs for the renewable penetration to happen, which is that is going to certainly requires remodeling of or relook at what the utility role is going to be. Within the context of CARICOM, we are looking at utilities beginning to play a role behind the meter and to finance and assist customers in respect to distributed generation energy efficiency through unbilled services. We refer to it as an integrated utility service model, and this is something that we are currently exploring. The utility has the experience of customer relations, the utility has the experience of procuring equipment, the utility has the experience of raising financing, the utility has the experience of collecting bills and managing payments, and we believe that some of these experiences can be utilized to strengthen the utilities' ability to deliver the services of grid service operation, but at the same time to improve services to customers. The fact is, for the electricity systems to work, we need to have healthy, financially stable utilities. And last, we go to the issue of climate and disaster resilience, which we spoke about this morning, but not in detail. As we understand the climate issues, we have to figure out not just the impact of the dramatic climate-related disasters on our systems, like our energy infrastructure, such as our generators, and on our grid. We understand how floods and hurricanes and landslides are going to affect them. But we must also understand the slower climate processes, such as heat. How will higher temperatures affect the efficiency of our thermal generators, our solar PV generation? How will higher temperatures affect our air conditioning and refrigeration efficiency? How will that affect demand? On the demand side too, temperatures will affect demand. How will water availability and the changes in the hydrological cycle impact the resources, the renewable resources, as we plan more hydro resources in some instances, and also impact the water requirements for thermal generators, as well as water demand for society, which energy is a big contributor towards. And really, it's a complex web. What we're asking, and I'm not expecting you to read this a lot of English, but we're asking for reliable, affordable, sustainable provision of energy services. We're asking for it to be matched to society's developmental needs. We're asking for it to be diverse, robust, and we're asking for it to be provided with new generation technologies that are appropriate. We're asking for it to be equitably provided to all society, all sectors of society. Therefore, we want it to be cost effective. We want it to be resilient. So it's a lot that we are demanding of our energy system. So what you see here is a complexity that is getting more complex in terms of the decision-making arrangements that are necessary. And so the information piece, how do we model this complexity, is one of what we are, part of what we are pursuing within CARICOM within the context of a regional energy modeling arrangement that includes clusters of universities, as well as the newly formed center, the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, that will provide a lot of the details that will help us to understand what the system model should look like. And we are putting on the back end of that a much more robust energy information and knowledge management arrangement, such that all stakeholders at the level of governments, private sector, civil society are able to make more informed decisions and to also build capacity through a CARICOM energy portal. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a snapshot. Thank you very much.
Gracias al doctor Devon Gardner.